One text message. That's all it took to change everything. If this is your first time here, welcome. Like the video, share it with someone who loves stories, drop a comment, and subscribe so you never miss the next tale. Rain Jones sat alone in her Tokyo apartment at 2:47 a.m., staring at her phone screen through tears. Her husband hadn't come home again. Third night this week. Outside, the city hummed with late-night energy, neon lights bleeding through the curtains she'd forgotten to close. Inside? Nothing but silence and the crushing weight of a marriage that had been dead for months. She shouldn't have been ovulating. Shouldn't have felt that primal pull toward intimacy when everything else in her life was crumbling. Biology doesn't care about heartbreak, though. Her body wanted what her mind knew she couldn't have: connection, touch, someone who actually saw her. Scrolling through her contacts with wine-blurred vision, Rain found her husband's name. CO. Even seeing it on her screen made her chest tight. Her fingers moved across the keyboard, typing words she'd never had the courage to say out loud. Baby, I need you. I'm ovulating and I need to feel close to someone tonight. Please come home. Vulnerable. Raw. Desperate. Hit send. The message disappeared into the digital void. Relief washed over her for exactly 4 seconds before her phone buzzed with a response that made her blood run cold. I think you have the wrong number. Wrong number. Panic slammed into her like a physical force. Rain's hands trembled as she scrolled back up to check the contact. The number was saved under CO, but it wasn't his number. Somehow, at some point, her husband's contact information had changed on her phone. Maybe he'd gotten a new number and never told her. Maybe she'd accidentally deleted it during one of their fights and saved something else by mistake. Either way, she just sent the most intimate, mortifying text of her entire life to a complete stranger. In a penthouse across the city, KG Show read the message 3 times. Most people who accidentally texted him got blocked immediately. His number was unlisted, protected, known only to a very specific circle of people who understood that contacting him meant you were either doing business or making a fatal mistake. Random messages simply didn't happen in his world. This one, though. Something about it stopped him from deleting it right away. The vulnerability in those words felt real in a way that most things in his life didn't anymore. KG had built an empire in Tokyo's underground, a network of power, money, and fear that stretched through the city's shadows like roots through concrete. People knew his name even when they pretended not to. Whispered it in back rooms and dark alleys. Crossed the street when they saw his men approaching. Nobody sent him texts about ovulating. He studied the message again, analyzing it the way he analyzed everything. An American woman, judging by the phrasing and tone. Living in Tokyo, clearly. Married to someone named CO, or at least she thought she was texting someone named CO. The desperation bleeding through the screen suggested a relationship in serious trouble. KG's instinct told him to respond with something cold, something that would make this woman disappear back into whatever life she'd accidentally pulled him into. His curiosity, though, that rarely satisfied thing that had kept him alive in a world where curiosity usually got people killed, wanted to know more. Before he could talk himself out of it, he typed a response. Are you safe? 3 words. Simple. Non-threatening. The kind of thing a decent human being would ask someone who just exposed their vulnerability to a stranger. Rain stared at the reply, her heart hammering. This stranger could have mocked her. Could have sent something crude or ignored her completely. Instead, he'd asked if she was safe. Something about that question cracked something open inside her chest. Physically, yes. Everything else? Not so much. She hit send before she could overthink it. What did it matter anymore? She'd already humiliated herself. Might as well be honest with someone, even if that someone was a random person whose number had somehow ended up in her phone. KG read her response and felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. Concern, maybe. Or recognition. He'd spent 15 years building walls around himself, becoming the kind of man who didn't feel things like empathy or compassion. Emotions were liabilities in his world. Weaknesses that got exploited. But this woman's pain felt different. Honest. Like she wasn't trying to manipulate or seduce or gain anything. She was just hurting. Your husband? The question appeared on Rain's screen, and she laughed, a bitter, broken sound that echoed in the empty apartment. This stranger understood more from 2 texts than CO had understood in 2 years of marriage. Hasn't been home in 3 days. Probably with his secretary. Or maybe it's someone new this week. Hard to keep track. She sent it without hesitation this time. There was something liberating about confessing to someone who didn't know her, who had no stake in her life or her choices. No judgment. No history. Just 2 strangers having the most brutally honest conversation she'd had in months. KG stood and walked to his floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Tokyo. The city sprawled below him like a living organism, millions of lives intersecting and diverging every second. Somewhere out there, this woman sat alone in the dark, married to a man who didn't deserve her, sending her pain to a stranger. A man named Seo who was cheating on his wife. Keiji's jaw tightened. He hadn't built his reputation by being sentimental or getting involved in other people's personal disasters. Every decision he made served a purpose, advanced a goal, eliminated a threat. This should have been nothing. Delete. Block. Move on. Instead, he saved her number. Morning came too quickly. Rain woke with her phone still clutched in her hand, battery at 3%, and a headache that felt like punishment for last night's wine and confession. Sunlight cut through the curtains at a brutal angle, illuminating every corner of the apartment she'd spent 2 years trying to make feel like home. It never had. Seo still wasn't back. His side of the bed remained perfectly made, untouched since she'd changed the sheets 4 days ago. The apartment was too quiet, the kind of silence that amplifies every small sound until you can hear your own heartbeat echoing in your ears. Her phone buzzed. Despite everything logical screaming at her to leave it alone, Rain looked. Did he come home? 3 words from the stranger. The same stranger who'd shown more concern for her well-being in 3 texts than her own husband had shown in 3 months. Rain sat up, running a hand through her braids, debating whether responding again was incredibly stupid or just regular stupid. Probably both. No. But that's normal now. Send. What was she doing? Confiding in some random person about her failing marriage like they were old friends. This could be anyone. A teenager pranking her. Some creep collecting stories. A bot programmed to seem sympathetic. Except it didn't feel like any of those things. Across the city, Keiji reviewed the surveillance footage his men had pulled during the night. Finding Rain Jones had taken less than 4 hours. American woman, 29 years old, married to Seo Taejun for 18 months. Living in Shibuya, working remotely as a freelance translator. Her husband worked at Hironaka Financial Group. That name made Keiji's blood run cold for reasons Rain couldn't possibly understand. Hironaka Mamoru owned that company, the same Hironaka who'd been trying to edge into Keiji's territory for the past 2 years. The same man who'd sent 3 separate assassination attempts in the last 6 months alone. Seo worked for his enemy. Coincidence? Maybe. Keiji had learned long ago that the world was smaller than people like to believe, especially in Tokyo's interconnected web of business and crime. Still, something about the timing felt wrong. Too convenient. Too neat. He pulled up Seo's financial records next. His people were thorough, efficient, trained to extract information from systems that weren't supposed to be hackable. What they found painted an interesting picture. Seo Taejun was hemorrhaging money. Gambling debts at 3 underground casinos, 2 of which were owned by Hironaka's subsidiary operations. Credit cards maxed out. Loans from questionable sources. The man was drowning financially while his American wife sat at home, apparently oblivious to the fact that her husband was buried under a mountain of debt he had no way of paying. Keiji made a call. I need eyes on someone. Seo Taejun works at Hironaka Financial. Everything he does, everywhere he goes. I want to know who he's meeting, who he's sleeping with, and how deep in Hironaka's pocket he actually is. His second-in-command, Takashi, didn't question the order. Never did. That's why he'd survived 7 years in Keiji's organization when most didn't make it past 2. Consider it done, boss. Anything specific we're looking for? Keiji glanced at his phone, at Rain's last message still glowing on the screen. Just watch him. Report anything unusual. He ended the call before Takashi could ask why they were suddenly surveilling a mid-level finance employee with no apparent connection to their operations. Keiji didn't have a good answer for that. Couldn't explain why some woman's accidental text had triggered this level of interest. Maybe it was strategic. Seo worked for Hironaka, which made him potentially useful as leverage or information. That's what Keiji told himself as he typed another response to Rain. You deserve better than that. Simple. True. The kind of thing he had no business saying to a married woman he'd never met. Rain read the message 3 times. 4. Lost count somewhere around 6. This stranger kept saying exactly what she needed to hear, which should have been a red flag the size of Tokyo Tower. People who said the right things usually wanted something in return. But what could this person possibly want from her? She was nobody. A translator working from home, drowning in a marriage that had turned toxic so gradually she hadn't noticed until she was already suffocating. No money, no connections, no power. Nothing that would make her interesting to anyone, let alone someone who texted like they'd stepped out of a different world entirely. I used to think so too, she typed back. Now I'm not sure what I deserve. Honesty was becoming addictive. Every text felt like releasing pressure from a wound that had been infected for months. Dangerous, maybe. Definitely unwise. But sometimes survival looks like grabbing the first hand extended toward you, even when you can't see who it belongs to. Keiji received her response while reviewing property deeds connected to Hironaka's legitimate business fronts. The words on his phone made him pause, made something in his chest tighten in a way that felt almost forgotten. He'd spent 15 years becoming the kind of man who didn't feel. Couldn't afford to feel. Emotion was weakness in his world, and weakness got you killed. But something about this woman's resigned sadness cut through all that carefully constructed armor. Before he could stop himself, he dialed a number. Takashi. Change of plans. I want protection detail on Rain Jones. Discreet. She doesn't know we're there. Silence stretched across the line. Then, carefully, the American woman married to CO? Yes. Boss, I don't. You don't need to understand. Just do it. Keiji ended the call and stared at his phone. Protecting a stranger. Investigating her husband. Getting involved in something that had nothing to do with business or territory or any rational reason he could defend his organization. This was how mistakes started. How men in his position got soft, got careless, got dead. He typed anyway. You deserve someone who comes home. 3 days of texting turned into a week. Then 2. Rain found herself reaching for her phone more often than she wanted to admit, checking for messages from the stranger who'd somehow become the most consistent presence in her life. They talked about everything. Nothing. The way Tokyo looked at dawn when the city was just waking up. How loneliness felt different depending on whether you were alone or surrounded by people who didn't see you. Books, music, the small observations that made life bearable when everything else felt broken. Never names, though. Never anything too specific. It felt safer that way, like they existed in some protected bubble outside normal rules. Rain told herself it wasn't cheating. They weren't sexting or exchanging photos or planning to meet. Just 2 people talking through screens, sharing pieces of themselves they couldn't share with anyone else. But late at night, when CO still hadn't come home and her mystery contact sent something that made her laugh for the first time in months, she wondered if emotional infidelity counted just as much as physical. Maybe more. Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life? She texted one afternoon while rain hammered against her windows. Like you made choices that made sense at the time, and now you're trapped in the consequences? Keiji read her message from the back of his car, stuck in Roppongi traffic with Takashi driving and 2 bodyguards flanking them in a second vehicle. He'd just left a meeting that had resulted in 3 broken fingers and 1 shattered kneecap for a man who'd thought skimming money from Keiji's operations was somehow a sustainable career choice. His hands were clean. They always were. He didn't do the dirty work himself anymore, hadn't for years. But he'd watched. Made sure the message was received, understood, transmitted to anyone else who might be considering similar mistakes. Now he was texting a woman who asked him about feeling trapped in his own life. The irony wasn't lost on him. Every day, he typed back. Sometimes I think we all make choices based on survival, then spend years wondering why we feel dead inside. Send. Too honest. Too revealing. Keiji had spent 15 years perfecting the art of saying nothing real, giving nothing away, keeping every conversation transactional or threatening or both. This woman pulled the truth out of him like drawing poison from a wound. Dangerous didn't begin to cover it. Takashi glanced at him in the rearview mirror, said nothing. Good. The protection detail on Rain had been running for 2 weeks now, and his men knew better than to comment on operations they didn't understand. They watched, they reported, they kept her safe from threats she didn't know existed. Like her husband, for instance. The surveillance on CO had revealed exactly what Keiji suspected. The man was Hironaka's puppet, buried so deep in debt and dirty money that he'd do anything to stay afloat. Worse, he was actively embezzling from his own company's accounts, small amounts at first, then increasingly bold thefts that would eventually get noticed. When they did, Hironaka would have leverage. Complete control over a man who was married to an American woman, a foreigner, someone who could be useful in a dozen different ways if you knew how to apply pressure. Keiji had seen this pattern before. Hironaka collected pawns the way some people collected art, strategically, patiently, waiting for the right moment to deploy them against his enemies. He wouldn't let Rain become collateral damage in that game. I moved to Tokyo thinking it would be an adventure, she texted. CO seemed so different from the men I grew up around. Sophisticated. Worldly. I thought marrying him meant stepping into some better version of my life. Keiji watched the rain streak across his window, imagining her in that Shibuya apartment, alone again, confessing to a stranger because she had nobody else. And now? Now I think I confuse different with better. Turns out emotional neglect feels the same in any language. Her words hit him harder than they should have. KG had built an empire on reading people, understanding motivations, exploiting weaknesses. But Rain wasn't a mark or a target or a threat. She was just a woman who'd made the mistake of loving someone who didn't love her back. You could leave. He sent it before considering the implications. Before thinking about why he cared whether she stayed in a bad marriage or what happened to her if she tried to walk away. Rain stared at the message. 3 words that made it sound so simple. Just leave. Pack a bag, book a flight, start over somewhere else like the last 2 years hadn't happened. Like she hadn't given up her entire life in America to be here. Like divorce was just a decision instead of an unraveling. And go where? Do what? I gave up everything to move here. My job, my apartment, my friends. Everything I had is gone. If I leave him, I leave with nothing. The truth sat heavy in her chest. She'd made herself small for this marriage, carved away pieces of herself until she fit into the shape CO wanted. Now she wasn't sure how much of her was even left. KG read her response and made a decision that would change everything. He called Takashi. I need complete financial documentation on CO Taejun. Every account, every debt, every illegal transaction. Everything he's stolen from Hironaka Financial and everywhere he's hidden it. Boss, that's going to take 48 hours. I want it all. And then? KG looked at his phone, at Rain's last message still glowing on the screen. Then we give his wife an exit strategy. He hung up before Takashi could protest. This was insane. Strategically unsound. Getting involved in someone's personal life when he should be focused on Hironaka's movements, on protecting his territory, on maintaining the empire he'd built from blood and fear. But something about Rain made him want to be different. Made him remember what it felt like to care whether another person suffered or survived. Made him dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with power. He typed one more message. You won't leave with nothing. I'll make sure of that. Send. No going back now. Rain stared at the message until her vision blurred. You won't leave with nothing. I'll make sure of that. Who was this person? What kind of stranger made promises like that to someone they'd never met? Every rational part of her brain screamed that this was manipulation, some elaborate scam, a predator sensing vulnerability and moving in for the kill. But her gut, that instinct she'd ignored when she married CO, told her something different. Why would you help me? She typed back. You don't even know me. Fair question. KG sat in his office, surrounded by monitors displaying various operations across Tokyo. Drug shipments, protection rackets, legitimate businesses that laundered money so clean it could pass any audit. His empire, built on calculated violence and strategic fear. None of it prepared him for how to explain why he cared about a woman he'd never seen in person. Maybe I know enough, he replied. Maybe some things don't require years of history to recognize. Vague. Safe. True enough to not be a complete lie. Takashi appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand, expression carefully neutral. That meant bad news delivered with plausible deniability. We have a problem. KG gestured to him inside. Takashi closed the door, activated the white noise generators that made surveillance impossible, and pulled up footage on the tablet. CO met with Hironaka personally last night. 3 hours at that restaurant in Ginza, the one Hironaka uses for recruiting. The screen showed grainy surveillance from across the street. CO looking nervous, overdressed, and desperate. Hironaka calm, predatory, a shark circling wounded prey. The meeting ended with CO bowing too low, too long, the body language of a man who just sold something he couldn't get back. Do we have audio? Partial. They discussed expanding CO's role. Moving him into international accounts, specifically American holdings. Hironaka mentioned needing someone with personal connections to Western interests. KG's jaw tightened. Personal connections. Like an American wife. They're going to use her. Takashi nodded. Looks that way. Probably documentation fraud, maybe money laundering through her translator credentials. She works remotely, has access to international clients, perfect cover for moving dirty money across borders. Does she know? Unlikely. CO keeps her completely isolated from his work. She hasn't met any of his colleagues, never attends company events. He's keeping her ignorant on purpose. Smart strategy. Can't implicate what doesn't know it's guilty. Rain would wake up one day with federal investigators at her door, facing charges for crimes she didn't know she'd committed, while CO and Hironaka walked away clean. KG stood and walked to the window. 43 floors up, Tokyo stretched endlessly in every direction. Somewhere down there, Rain was waiting for a response from a stranger who'd just promised to help her. She had no idea her husband was already setting her up for destruction. The financial documentation I requested? Complete. CO's stolen over 40 million yen in the past 6 months. Hironaka knows, he's letting it happen. Building leverage. Send it to me. Everything. Takashi hesitated. Boss, getting involved with this woman. Noted. Dismissed. Cold. Final. The tone that meant conversation over. Takashi left without another word, but his concern lingered in the air like smoke. Rain wanted to argue, wanted to demand real answers. But the evidence on her screen was real, and whoever this person was, they'd just handed her the truth everyone else had been hiding. I need to confront him, she typed. Show him these documents. Make him explain. No. The response came back in seconds, all caps, urgent in a way none of his previous messages had been. If you confront Seo now, he'll know someone is investigating him. He'll warn Hironaka. You'll lose any advantage you have, and they'll accelerate whatever plan they have for you. Rain's stomach dropped. What kind of plan? The kind that ends with you in prison while they walk free. She sat down hard on her kitchen floor, back against the cabinet, phone clutched in both hands. This couldn't be real. People didn't just accidentally marry criminals who planned to frame them for financial crimes. That was movie plot nonsense, not actual life. Except the documents were real. The numbers were real. Her empty bank account was real. What do I do? She asked the stranger who somehow knew more about her life than she did. Keiji stood and paced his office. This was the critical moment. He could give her evidence, help her file for divorce, walk away knowing he'd saved her from immediate danger. Clean. Safe. Smart. Or he could tell her the whole truth. Pull her completely into his world. Make her understand that saving her meant going to war with one of the most dangerous men in Tokyo. You trust me, he typed. And you let me handle this. Handle it how? By giving you evidence that destroys Seo legally. By making sure Hironaka can't touch you. By setting you free. The words felt too big. Too impossible. Rain had learned not to trust impossible promises. And what do you want in return? There it was. The real question. Nobody helped for free, especially not with the kind of resources this person clearly had. There was always a price, always an angle. Keiji looked at his phone for a long moment before answering. What did he want? The question was more complicated than she could possibly understand. He wanted her safe. Wanted her away from Seo and Hironaka. Wanted to keep talking to her like this, these honest conversations that made him feel almost human again. I wanted to meet her. See if the woman behind these messages was as remarkable as he imagined. Nothing you're not willing to give, he finally replied. That's not an answer. It's the truth. I don't want your money. Don't want you compromised or obligated. I just want you free from people who would hurt you. Rain read his response 3 times, searching for the manipulation, the hidden agenda. Found nothing but what seemed like genuine concern from someone who had no logical reason to care. I don't understand why you're doing this. Neither do I, Keiji admitted. But here we are. Honest. Maybe too honest. His entire organization would be questioning his judgment if they knew how invested he'd become in saving someone he'd never met. Takashi already looked at him like he'd lost his mind. Maybe he had. If I do this, if I trust you, I need to know one thing first. Ask. Will you eventually tell me who you really are? No more evasions, no more vague answers. Just truth. Keiji stared at the question. Meeting her would mean exposing her to his world completely. Once she knew who he really was, once she understood the empire he controlled and the violence it required, there would be no going back. She'd either accept it or run, and either outcome would hurt in ways he wasn't prepared for. But she deserved honesty. Deserved to make informed choices after spending years with a man who'd lied about everything. Yes, he typed. When the time is right, I'll tell you everything. And then you can decide if you want me in your life or not. Promise? That word. Promise. Such a small thing, so easily broken. Keiji had made promises before, to allies, to business partners, to people who were now buried in graves nobody would ever find. Promises in his world were contracts written in blood. This one felt different. I promise. Send. Rain exhaled slowly, making a decision that would change everything. Trust a stranger or stay with a husband actively destroying her life. Not really a choice at all when she put it that way. Okay. Tell me what to do. Keiji's instructions came through methodically, precisely, like he'd orchestrated this kind of extraction 100 times before. Maybe he had. Rain tried not to think too hard about what that implied. Document everything. Every time Seo comes home, note the time, his condition, anything unusual. Check your mail daily, photograph any documents before he can see them. Don't change your behavior. Act normal. Normal. Right. Pretend everything was fine while her husband plotted to frame her for financial crimes. Simple. How long do I have to do this? She texted back. 2 weeks. Maybe 3. I'm building a case that will hold up legally. Divorce, fraud charges against him, protection orders. But it takes time to do correctly. 2 weeks of living with a man she now knew was actively dangerous. 2 weeks of pretending she didn't know her entire marriage was a carefully constructed lie. The thought made her skin crawl. But what choice did she have? Running without a plan meant leaving with nothing, exactly what she'd told her stranger she couldn't afford to do. At least this way, she'd leave with evidence, with legal protection, with something resembling justice. "I can do 2 weeks," she typed, hoping it was true. That night, Co came home at 11 p.m. First time in 6 days he'd bothered to sleep in their apartment. Rain was in the kitchen when she heard his key in the lock, and everything in her body screamed to confront him, to throw the evidence in his face and demand explanations. Instead, she smiled. "Hey, long day?" Co barely looked at her. "Yeah. Work stuff." Work stuff. Like that explained 6 days of absence. Like she was supposed to just accept whatever scraps of attention he tossed her way and be grateful. "There's leftover tonkatsu in the fridge if you're hungry." "Already ate." He loosened his tie, scrolled through his phone. "I'll be in the office." "Don't wait up." The office. Their spare bedroom that had become his personal fortress, off limits to her, always locked when he wasn't using it. She'd respected that boundary for 18 months, believing everyone deserved privacy even in marriage. Now she wondered what he was hiding in there. "Okay," she said softly. "Good night." He grunted something that might have been a response and disappeared down the hall. Door closed. Lock engaged. Rain stood alone in the kitchen, trying to remember why she'd ever loved this man. Coming up empty. Her phone buzzed. How did it go? Strange how this person knew exactly when she'd need support. Almost like he was watching. That thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt oddly comforting. "He's home. Barely acknowledged I exist. Normal, basically. You did well. I know this isn't easy." Rain laughed bitterly, silently. It wasn't easy. Understatement of the century. She was living with a criminal who saw her as collateral damage, texting a stranger who promised salvation, and somehow this was the most honest relationship in her life right now. "Can I ask you something?" she typed. "Always. Why do you text at exactly the times I need you to? It's like you know when I'm falling apart." Silence stretched across the digital space between them. KG stared at his phone, at the surveillance feed showing Rain's apartment on one of his monitors, and tried to figure out how to answer without revealing he'd been watching her for weeks. "Maybe I'm just paying attention," he finally replied. "Most people don't." True enough. Vague enough. She couldn't possibly know that paying attention meant a dedicated team monitoring her safety 24 hours a day, that he'd reviewed footage of every interaction she'd had since that first accidental text. That he'd watched her cry alone in the dark more times than he could count, and each time it made him want to burn Co's world to ash. "Well," Rain texted back, "thank you for paying attention. It means more than you know." Those words hit him harder than they should have. KG ran an empire built on fear and violence, commanded loyalty through power and intimidation. But this woman thanked him for simply noticing she existed. When had he become someone who needed that? The next 2 weeks crawled past like years. Rain documented everything: Co's erratic schedule, mysterious phone calls he took in the locked office, packages that arrived and disappeared before she could see what they contained. She photographed mail, noted expenditures, built a timeline of his movements. Played the perfect oblivious wife while gathering ammunition for war. It was exhausting. Maintaining the facade required constant vigilance, remembering to smile at the right moments, to not ask questions that would raise suspicion. Some nights she lay awake wondering if she was losing her mind, if trusting a stranger on the internet was somehow more insane than staying with a husband who'd betrayed her in every possible way. But then her mystery contact would text something that made her feel seen, understood, valued. And she'd remember why she was doing this. On day 13, everything changed. Rain was sorting mail when she found an envelope addressed to her from a law firm she'd never heard of. Official looking. Heavy paper. The kind of correspondence that meant something serious. She opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a subpoena. Federal investigators wanted to question her about international wire transfers made through her business accounts. Transactions she'd never authorized, amounts she'd never seen, destinations she'd never approved. They'd already done it. Hironaka and Co had already used her credentials to move money, and now authorities were coming for her. Rain's vision tunneled. This was real. Not some theoretical danger her stranger had warned about, actual federal investigators with actual evidence of crimes she didn't commit. She photographed the subpoena with trembling hands and sent it to her contact. "They've already started. What should I do?" Across the city, KG received the image and felt cold rage settle in his chest. Hironaka had moved faster than expected, which meant he knew someone was investigating. Which meant they had a leak. Which meant Rain was in immediate danger. He made 3 calls in rapid succession. First to his lawyer, the best criminal defense attorney in Tokyo, someone who owed Keiji more favors than could be repaid in a lifetime. Second to Takashi, time to move up the timeline, get Rain out now. Third to someone he hadn't called in 5 years, someone who specialized in making problems disappear. Then he texted Rain. Pack a bag. You're leaving tonight. Pack a bag. 3 words that meant abandoning everything she'd built in Tokyo. Rain stared at her closet, at clothes she'd carefully selected, books she'd collected, the small pieces of life she'd assembled trying to make this place feel like home. None of it mattered now. She grabbed a duffel bag and started throwing in essentials. Passport, laptop, chargers, enough clothes for a week. Her hands moved mechanically while her brain screamed questions she couldn't answer. Where was she going? Who was she meeting? What happened after tonight? I'm scared, she texted. I know. But you're not alone. A car will pick you up at midnight. Black sedan, license plate ending in 4721. The driver's name is Takashi. He works for me. Works for me. That phrase suggested organization, resources, the kind of infrastructure that didn't come from being a normal person with a normal job. Rain's hands stilled on the sweater she'd been folding. What exactly do you do? We'll talk about that when you're safe. Right now, just focus on being ready at midnight. Evasion. Again. But arguing seemed pointless when federal investigators wanted to question her about crimes she didn't commit and her husband was somewhere plotting her destruction. What about CO? He'll come home eventually. He'll know I left. He won't be a problem. Something about those words, cold, final, absolute, made Rain's stomach twist. She wanted to ask what that meant, but part of her didn't want to know. At 11:47 p.m., Rain stood by the window with her duffel bag, watching the street below. CO hadn't come home. Probably with whoever he was sleeping with this week, oblivious that his wife was about to vanish from his life completely. Good. Let him come home to an empty apartment and wonder. At 11:59, a black sedan pulled up precisely where her contact said it would be. License plate ending in 4721. Professional, punctual, exactly as promised. Rain took one last look at the apartment she'd tried so hard to love. Then she walked out and didn't look back. The driver was a man in his 40s, sharp suit, sharper eyes that assessed her in one efficient glance. Ms. Jones. I'm Takashi. Please get in. His English was perfect, accent minimal. Rain slid into the back seat, bag clutched on her lap, heart hammering against her ribs. They drove in silence through Tokyo's midnight streets. Rain watched the city slide past, neon signs, late-night convenience stores, the familiar landscape of a life she was leaving behind. 20 minutes later, they pulled into an underground garage beneath a building she didn't recognize. Where are we? Somewhere safe. Please follow me. Takashi led her to a private elevator that required a keycard and biometric scan. They rose smoothly upward, floors ticking past on a digital display. When the doors opened, Rain stepped into a penthouse that looked like something from a magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Tokyo, minimalist furniture, artwork that probably cost more than her entire marriage. And standing by the window, back to her, was a man she'd never seen before but somehow knew immediately. You must be Rain. His voice matched the text's, calm, certain, with an underlying warmth that felt genuine despite the clinical surroundings. He turned around, and Rain forgot how to breathe. Keiji Sho was not what she'd expected. Mid-30s, dark hair styled with careless precision, wearing a black button-down that probably cost more than her rent. But it was his eyes that stopped her, dark, intelligent, carrying the weight of someone who'd seen too much and survived anyway. Beautiful. Dangerous. Looking at her like she was the only thing in the room that mattered. You're real, Rain said stupidly. Were you expecting a catfish? A slight smile touched his lips. I'm Keiji. Rain. But you already know that. I do. He gestured to the sofa. Please, sit. You must have questions. Questions. Where did she even start? Rain sank onto the expensive leather, suddenly aware of how out of place she looked in her jeans and oversized sweater, hair thrown up in a messy bun because she'd been too stressed to care about appearance. Keiji sat across from her, maintaining respectful distance. I promised I'd tell you the truth. So here it is, I'm not a businessman or investor or any of the safe explanations you might have imagined. I run an organization that operates outside legal boundaries. Some would call it crime. I call it survival in a system that wasn't built for people like me. Rain's mouth went dry. You're Yakuza. Not exactly. The Yakuza have rules, hierarchies, and traditional codes. I operate independently. More efficient that way. A crime boss. She'd been texting a crime boss for weeks, trusting him to save her, and now she was sitting in his penthouse with no exit strategy and no idea what he wanted from her. She should have been terrified. Should have run. But looking at KG, at the man who'd shown her more genuine care through a phone screen than her husband had shown in person, she felt something closer to relief. Why did you help me? The question came out quieter than she intended. You could have ignored that first text. Could have blocked me and moved on. Why didn't you? KG was quiet for a long moment, studying her with an intensity that made her feel simultaneously exposed and protected. Honestly? I'm still trying to figure that out. You reached out in a moment of vulnerability, and something about you, made me want to ensure you were safe. Then I discovered your husband works for my enemy, and you became strategically relevant. But that's not the whole answer, Rain said, reading between the lines. No. He leaned forward slightly. The whole answer is more complicated. Somewhere between that first text and tonight, you became someone I couldn't stop thinking about. Someone whose pain felt personal. Someone I wanted to protect not because of strategy or business, but because the thought of CO or Hironaka hurting you made me want to burn their world down. The honesty in his words stole her breath. This man, this dangerous, powerful man, was admitting he cared about her. Not as a pawn or asset, but as a person. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything yet. Right now, you need to rest. Tomorrow, we deal with the legal situation. After that, you decide what comes next. What do you mean? KG stood and walked to the window, giving her space. I mean you're free, Rain. Free from CO, from Hironaka's plans, from anyone who would use you. What you do with that freedom is entirely your choice. Rain slept better that night than she had in months. The guest room with sheets that felt like clouds, silence so complete she could hear her own heartbeat, safety she hadn't experienced since before she'd married CO. When she woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows, it took her a moment to remember where she was. Then everything came rushing back. The subpoena. The escape. KG. She found him in the kitchen, making coffee with the kind of precise movements that suggested this was ritual. He looked different in daylight, still dangerous, but softer somehow. More human. Good morning. How did you sleep? Better than I have in a year. Rain accepted the coffee he offered, surprised he remembered she took it black. Then again, this man had orchestrated her entire extraction. Of course he paid attention to details. We need to discuss the legal situation. Right. Federal investigators. Fraudulent transactions. The reason she was here instead of in her apartment pretending everything was fine. KG pulled up documents on his tablet. My attorney reviewed your subpoena. They're investigating wire transfers totaling 8 million yen, all processed through your translator business accounts over the past 3 months. The transactions originated from Hironaka Financial and were routed through shell companies before landing in accounts tied to known criminal enterprises. Rain's stomach dropped. I never authorized any of that. I know. CO has been using your credentials, your business license, your digital signature. Everything is forged, but proving that requires evidence you haven't had access to. Until now? Until now. KG slid the tablet toward her. These are server logs showing all account access came from IP addresses tied to Hironaka Financial, specifically CO's workstation. Timestamps prove you were nowhere near a computer when these transactions occurred. Security footage confirms it. Additionally, forensic analysis shows the digital signatures are algorithmic forgeries, not authentic. Relief and rage warred in her chest. How did you get all this? I have resources. That's not an answer. It's the only one I can give without implicating you in how I acquire information. KG's expression was gentle but firm. The less you know about my methods, the safer you are legally. It made sense. Illegal sense, but sense nonetheless. Rain scanned through the documents, seeing her innocence spelled out in data and timestamps and cold, hard facts. Will this clear me? Completely. My attorney is filing everything with federal prosecutors today. By tomorrow, you'll be reclassified from suspect to victim. They'll redirect their investigation toward CO and Hironaka. Victim. The word felt strange. Rain had been a victim for months without realizing it, victimized by her husband's lies, by Hironaka's schemes, by her own willingness to trust someone who'd never deserved it. But she didn't feel like a victim anymore. She felt angry. What happened to CO? KG's expression hardened. That depends on what you want. I can ensure he faces federal prosecution, which means prison time, asset forfeiture, complete destruction of his life. Or what? Or I can handle it differently. Permanently. The implication hung in the air between them. Rain should have been horrified. Should have immediately said no, insisted on legal justice, maintained the moral high ground. Instead, she thought about CO coming home barely acknowledging her existence. Thought about him planning to frame her for crimes that would destroy her life. Thought about 18 months of emotional neglect and calculated cruelty. I want him to suffer legally, she said quietly. I want him prosecuted, exposed, humiliated. I want everyone to know what he did. Keiji nodded, something like respect flickering in his eyes. Then that's what will happen. And Hironaka? Now Keiji smiled, but there was nothing warm about it. Hironaka is a different problem. He's been trying to move into my territory for 2 years. Using your husband to commit fraud was just one piece of a much larger strategy. He needs to be handled more comprehensively. Meaning? Meaning I'm going to dismantle his organization piece by piece until there's nothing left. The casual certainty in his voice should have frightened her. This was a man who could destroy empires and did so without hesitation. But knowing he was directing that power away from her, using it to protect her instead of harm her, felt intoxicating. Why are you really doing this? Rain asked. And don't say strategy. There are easier ways to hurt your enemy than protecting his associate's wife. Keiji set down his coffee and looked at her directly. Because when you sent that first text, you reminded me that vulnerability isn't weakness. That asking for connection takes more courage than any violence I've ever committed. You've been living with a man who made you feel small, invisible, worthless. I wanted you to know you're none of those things. His words hit her like a physical force. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. How to trust someone again after everything. You don't have to trust me completely. Not yet. Keiji stood and walked to where she sat. But maybe you can trust that I mean what I say. That when I promised to keep you safe, I meant it. That when I tell you you're worth protecting, I'm not manipulating you, I'm telling you what I genuinely believe. Rain looked up at him, at this impossible man who'd entered her life through a wrong number and somehow become her lifeline. What happens after the legal stuff is resolved? After CO is prosecuted and I'm officially free? That's entirely up to you. You can leave Tokyo, start over somewhere else. I'll provide resources, protection, whatever you need. Or you can stay. Get to know me outside of crisis management. See if the connection we built through texts translates to real life. Her heart hammered. And if it doesn't? Then you leave with my blessing and my continued protection. No strings, no obligations. And if it does? Keiji's expression softened. Then we figure out what comes next together. The possibility hung between them, fragile, terrifying, full of potential. Before Rain could respond, Keiji's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his entire demeanor changed. Cold. Lethal. The man who ran an empire through fear and violence. What is it? Hironaka knows you're missing. He's sending people to find you. Keiji made 4 calls in rapid succession, his voice clipped and commanding in Japanese. Rain caught words here and there, her translator brain automatically processing even when fear was flooding her system. Perimeter. Armed. Now. What's happening? She asked when he hung up. Hironaka's men are searching for you. They traced you leaving your apartment last night, but lost the trail at the garage. They don't know you're here, but they're looking. He turned to face her fully. I need you to trust me completely right now. Can you do that? Rain nodded, throat tight. Good. Takashi is bringing additional security. You'll stay in this penthouse until the situation is neutralized. Don't go near windows. Don't leave for any reason. Understand? What are you going to do? Keiji's expression was cold steel. I'm going to end this. Hironaka wanted war. He's about to get one. Before she could respond, he was gone, moving with lethal purpose toward the elevator. Rain stood frozen in the middle of the living room, listening to the silence that felt suddenly oppressive. This was real. She wasn't just escaping a bad marriage, she was caught in the middle of something far more dangerous than she'd understood. Keiji had protected her, yes, but now that protection meant violence, meant war, meant people would get hurt because of her. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Tell Keiji Sho to send you back. You don't belong in his world. Last warning. Ice flooded her veins. They had her number. We're tracking her communications. She forwarded the message to Keiji immediately, hands shaking. His response came back in seconds. Don't respond. Don't engage. You're safe. I promise. Takashi arrived with 3 other men, all carrying that same efficient danger that marked Keiji's people. They stationed themselves strategically throughout the penthouse, transforming it from a sanctuary into a fortress. Ms. Jones, please stay in the center rooms, away from exterior walls, Takashi said. We've secured the building, but caution is necessary. How long will this last? Until boss handles it. Said with absolute confidence, like Keiji ending a war was as certain as sunrise. Hours crawled past. Rain tried to focus on mundane things, answering work emails, organizing files, anything to keep her mind occupied. But every sound made her jump, every shadow seemed threatening. This was what KG lived with constantly. Threats, violence, enemies circling. How did anyone survive that? Her phone rang. KG's number. "Are you okay?" she answered immediately. "I'm fine. Listen carefully, I'm meeting with Hironaka in 1 hour. Neutral ground, negotiated terms. I'm going to end this tonight. Is that safe?" A pause. Then, quieter, "Probably not. But it's necessary. If something happens. Don't." Rain's voice cracked. "Don't say goodbye like you're not coming back." "I'm coming back," KG said firmly. "I have something worth coming back for now. But I needed you to know that regardless of what happens, you're protected. My organization has instructions. You'll be safe, financially secure, free to build whatever life you want." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I don't want your instructions. I want you to come back. Then wait for me." The line went dead. Rain stared at her phone. At this impossible situation she'd stumbled into through one accidental text. She'd been looking for connection, for someone to see her, and instead found a man who'd turned her world inside out. A criminal who showed her more genuine care than her husband ever had. Someone who was about to walk into danger because protecting her meant destroying his enemy. Time stopped meaning anything. Takashi gave her updates when he received them. KG arrived at the meeting location, negotiations were proceeding, situation stable. Each update should have been reassuring but only made her more anxious. At 11:47 p.m., gunfire erupted somewhere in the city. Takashi's radio exploded with urgent Japanese. His expression never changed, but Rain saw his hand move to his weapon. What's happening? Hironaka violated the terms. Ambush at the meeting site. Takashi was already moving, coordinating with his team. Stay here. Do not leave this room. Is KG? We don't know yet. Those 4 words were worse than any confirmation. Rain collapsed onto the sofa, phone clutched in her hands, waiting for a message that might never come. This was her fault. If she'd never sent that text, never trusted him, never let him get involved in her mess. Her phone buzzed. "I'm okay. It's over." Relief hit her so hard she couldn't breathe. Tears came freely now, weeks of stress and fear and uncertainty pouring out. He was alive. He'd survived. 20 minutes later, the elevator opened and KG stepped out. Bruised jaw, torn shirt, blood on his knuckles that probably wasn't his. But alive. Whole. Looking at her like she was the only thing keeping him standing. Rain crossed the room before conscious thought caught up. Threw her arms around him despite the blood, despite everything, needing to confirm he was real and solid and here. KG held her tight, face buried in her hair. "I'm okay. You're okay. It's finished." Hironaka. In custody. Federal prosecutors have him on enough charges to guarantee life in prison. His organization is scattered. CO is cooperating with authorities to avoid maximum sentencing. KG pulled back enough to meet her eyes. "You're free, Rain. Completely free. Free." The word felt foreign. She'd been trapped so long, in a bad marriage, in Hironaka's schemes, in fear, that freedom seemed impossible. "What about us?" she asked quietly. "Where do we go from here?" KG cupped her face gently, thumb brushing away tears. "Anywhere you want. Everything I said before still stands. You can leave, start fresh, and I'll support that choice. Or I can stay and figure out what this is between us." "Yes." Rain searched his face, seeing the vulnerability beneath the danger, the man beneath the empire. He'd saved her life, yes. But more than that, he'd seen her when she was invisible, cared when she was alone, fought for her when she couldn't fight for herself. "I want to stay," she whispered. "I want to see if what we built through screens is real in person. I want to know who you are when you're not saving me from danger." "I want that too." KG smiled, genuine, warm, transformative. "Fair warning though, my life is complicated. Good thing I'm adaptable." 6 months later, Rain stood in front of a mirror adjusting a dress she'd chosen herself. Not for a husband who barely noticed her existence, but for a man who looked at her like she held his entire world in her hands. The divorce from CO had been finalized 3 months ago. He'd received a 12-year sentence for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Hironaka got life without parole. Federal prosecutors had called it one of the biggest financial crime busts in Tokyo's recent history. Rain had testified, told her story, and watched the men who'd tried to destroy her face justice. Then she'd walked away and started building something new. Living with KG hadn't been what she expected. Yes, he ran a criminal empire. Yes, there were bodyguards and security protocols and moments when danger felt too close. But there was also laughter over breakfast, late-night conversations about everything and nothing, the kind of partnership she'd thought only existed in novels. He saw her. I really saw her. Noticed when she was stressed, when she needed space, when she needed someone to just hold her. Asked about her work, her dreams, her thoughts on art and philosophy, and whether pizza constituted an acceptable dinner choice 3 nights in a row. Made her feel cherished in ways she'd forgotten were possible. Tonight was special, though. KG had been mysterious about their plans, which meant something significant was happening. Rain had learned to read his moods, the subtle tells that indicated business versus personal, danger versus celebration. This felt like a celebration. You look beautiful, KG said from the doorway, wearing a suit that made her momentarily forget how to form coherent thoughts. You clean up pretty well yourself. Rain smiled, accepting the hand he offered. Are you going to tell me where we're going? Patience. Some surprises are worth waiting for. They drove to a part of Tokyo Rain didn't recognize. Not the tourist areas or entertainment districts, but quiet neighborhoods with traditional architecture and cherry trees lining narrow streets. The car stopped in front of a small restaurant that looked like it had been there for generations. Inside, warm lighting and intimate tables created an atmosphere that felt removed from time. Only 2 other tables were occupied, giving them privacy without complete isolation. This is where I come when I need to remember who I am beneath everything else, KG said as they settled into their seats. I wanted to share it with you. Over dinner, kaiseki that was more art than food, they talked about the future. Rain's translation business was thriving now that she'd rebuilt it without CO's corruption. KG was transitioning some of his operations toward legitimate enterprises, trying to build something sustainable beyond the violence that had defined his rise to power. I've been thinking, he said carefully, about what kind of legacy I want to leave. What kind of man I want to be. And I want to be the kind of man who deserves you. Who builds something worth protecting instead of just protecting what he's built. Rain reached across the table, taking his hand. You already are that man. You saved me when you had no reason to. Fight for me when you could have walked away. The empire you built doesn't define you, your choices do. KG studied their joined hands for a long moment. Then he stood, still holding her hand, and knelt beside the table. Rain's heart stopped. I never believed in fate until you sent that text, KG said quietly. Never thought one random moment could change everything. But you reminded me that vulnerability is strength, that connection matters more than power, that being truly seen by someone is worth any risk. He pulled out a small box. I know this is fast. I know my world is complicated and dangerous and not what you signed up for when you moved to Tokyo. But I also know that every day with you feels like waking up from a nightmare into something real. So I'm asking, will you marry me? The ring was simple, elegant, and perfect. But more than that was the look in his eyes, hope mixed with fear, the vulnerability of someone risking rejection from the one person whose answer actually mattered. Yes, Rain said through tears. 1,000 times yes. The proposal had been private, but the aftermath was anything but. KG's organization threw a celebration that felt more like a coronation, his people welcoming their boss's choice with genuine warmth. Rain met the men and women who worked for him, saw the loyalty he inspired, and understood that while his empire was built on crime, it was maintained through respect and protection. Their wedding 6 months later was intimate. Close friends, family flown in from America, a ceremony that blended tradition with modernity. Rain wore a dress that made her feel like herself, married a man who'd seen her at her lowest and chose to lift her higher. The first year of marriage brought challenges, adjusting to life with someone whose profession meant constant security concerns, learning to navigate his world while maintaining her independence. But it also brought joy, partnership, the profound relief of being with someone who actually chose her every single day. When Rain discovered she was pregnant with twins, KG's reaction was something between terror and overwhelming joy. He spent 9 months preparing obsessively, reading parenting books, child-proofing the penthouse, calling his mother in the middle of the night asking questions about diapers and feeding schedules. The day their daughters were born, Rain watched this man who commanded an empire through fear and violence hold his children with infinite gentleness, tears streaming down his face. They're perfect, he whispered. You're perfect. How did I get this lucky? Wrong number, Rain said with a smile. Best mistake I ever made. Years later, watching their daughters play while KG worked from home, now mostly legitimate businesses with only nominal connections to his former empire, Rain sometimes thought about that night she'd sent a desperate text to a stranger. How loneliness and ovulation hormones had conspired to change her entire life trajectory. She'd been looking for a connection, for someone to see her. What she'd found was destiny disguised as a mistake, love hidden in danger, and proof that sometimes the wrong number is exactly right. Her phone buzzed. A text from KG, even though he was in the next room. Still the best wrong number I ever received. Love you. Rain smiled and typed back. Love you too. Forever. Send. Wow, if you've made it all the way to this part of the story, thank you so much for sticking with me. That means you're really enjoying it, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Did you enjoy the story? Drop a comment below and let me know what you think. And while you're here, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with a friend, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Your support keeps this channel growing, and I can't wait to bring you even more stories.